Now, well, as we told you earlier, representatives of the federal government are meeting with the organized labor, which includes officials of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress at the State House here in Abuja. Now, the meeting is the third in a series of negotiations on the contentious petrol subsidy removal and price hikes. The NLC has steadfastly demanded that the government revert to the previous pump price of petrol before engaging in further negotiations. These have led to threats of nationwide strike action by labor unions. Now, in all of this, the question lingers, will the demands of organized labor be met? Will a meeting point be reached? Will the decisions be favorable to the Nigerian Labour Congress and Nigerians? Well, for more on this, I'm joined live from our Lagos studios by the legal practitioner and public affairs analyst George Eke. And with me in the studios is the policy strategist, political commentator and group CEO of the global investment and trade company, Baba Yusuf. Gentlemen, good to see you both, and thanks for your time as always. Let's start with you, George Eke. Subsidy, Michael Press earlier had told us what he thinks the government should do. He's on the side. And we're getting to see more and more Nigerians understanding what this is about. Let us in on your understanding of subsidy and what you think the president has done so far.
Yeah, good evening, viewers. The whole idea of subsidy is almost like a sing-song in Nigeria. But to simplify it is actually the difference between what would have been the landing cost of petroleum and what is sold as pump price, in which case, whatever the difference is, the government pays it on behalf of the consumer. And based on that, a lot of issues have arisen, on the subsidy issue. The subsidy, as a matter of fact, as we speak today, has become a huge scam. Indeed, it's not just a scam, it is some kind of hemorrhage that the country can no longer afford. For Nigerians, we are finding it difficult to swallow this bitter pill, but it is a necessary pill that is most likely going to cure an ailment that is like cancer in Nigeria. And that cancer is something that a lot of people call them the cabal or call them the oil cabal or the oil group that have been untouchable all this while. Recall that this issue of subsidy started a long time ago, at a point in time when it was a bazaar. Almost everybody had some papers of petroleum products that he or she imported into Nigeria. All the person needed is to do the proper documentation, and you go to NNPC and you get paid. And that was how the national consumption rate rose almost astronomically from 32 metric tons, I hope that measurement is correct, but 32 metric tons, and to what we have today, which is about 65 or 70 metric tons in a day. A lot of people have said that kind of consumption is not associated to the Nigerian populace. But we do know, as a matter of fact, that as much as those, if indeed those products come into Nigeria, they almost immediately disappear to the West African countries. So in other words, Nigeria borrows money because the way it is now, we now borrow money to be able to pay the subsidy. So we end up, borrowing money to subsidize the petroleum products consumed along the West Coast. Be it Benin Republic, be it Ghana, be it Niger, be it Chad, and all of that. All of these
just let me
all
comment
at the
here.
expense of Nigerians. And
allow me button here, George. I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Baba Yusuf. Baba, people are getting to speak more on the side of subsidy, and even when they know that it pinches and it hurts, they still talk about the ugly nature of that plan called subsidy on petrol. Speak to us on the kind of awareness that Nigerians are getting and why some still cry when they still say, well, it's a bad deal.
Thank you, Suleiman. This is a 50-year ailment, by the way, a malaise that has become, a recurring issue that needs to be dealt with for us to make progress, actually. And that is the reason why almost all the presidential candidates, including the president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, made a key campaign promise of eradicating the subsidy. Because the impact of subsidy is, to my mind, a perception in the minds of Nigerians over time that became a political tool that was used over time to continue getting into power and continuing the cyclical, what you call scam. The subsidy was supposed to impact on the price of petroleum, which Nigerians feel is almost the only thing they are benefiting from government. And maybe that is why a lot of Nigerians over time had been resisting the removal of subsidy, because to their mind, to our mind, this is the only thing we are benefiting from government. But it turns out it's a channel for the vested interest to make huge amount of money. We recall the former CBN governor, His Highness Sanusi Lamido Sunusi, that came out with the issues. And we saw how Nigerians stood and resisted, the attempt to remove subsidy by President Goodluck Jonathan, and you can go on and on. So it is an issue. Now it has ballooned to a situation whereby we are heavily indebted. We have a president coming to inherit a debt stock of over 77 trillion. We have a debt to GDP ratio about 23%. You can go on and on. And obviously it's not sustainable. And that is why you see people becoming more aware of the rational reason to remove subsidy. I think it has almost become a consensus. Now the question is the hows and the whens moving forward for us to make any traction in Nigeria.
Now, George Eke, I come back to you quickly here. Now that we're talking about the how and the when, perhaps let's start digging deep and talk more about what the government needs to do. Perhaps for those crying, talking about the pain they feel, in as much as they still think that it's okay for subsidy to go. What should the government be looking to doing for these Nigerians?
Yeah, I actually do not know where I stopped, before the line went off. But, I had gone as far as saying that the subsidy issue had become such a national problem that all the presidential candidates that contested the election, recently had, removal of subsidy as, their prime target. P2B had that, Atiku had that, and then the current president also had that in his manifesto. But one can even say that the current president decided to remove the subsidy on behalf of other candidates. So I'm not too sure that any of them will be complaining. And we have almost come to a national consensus that this is a scam, is a huge national hemorrhage, that has, eaten deep into the fabric of our social life to such an extent that the huge corruption or the scam that surrounds subsidy will be such that we cannot cope with again. But coming to what the government should do, I do know that Labour is not actually opposed to removal of subsidy. I think what they are bothered about is what are you going to put in place for us, while this subsidy goes, because it's like a national consensus now that subsidy must necessarily go, because in any case, there is even no provision for it. We don't even have money for it, because all this while, we have been borrowing money to, subsidize petroleum products for the whole of West African coast, because the moment the petroleum product gets into Nigeria, they always disappear into, Benin Republic, Chad, Niger, and all of those places and all of that, So the way it is now, we cannot continue to do that. I mean, somebody can always argue that it is the inefficiency of government, what are the custom people doing at the border and all of that. Those are all, theoretical, propositions of how to, shut our borders, whether we are going to build walls across the borders, those are matters that are not immediate now. So like you are asking me, the immediate things I think could be done. They must engage labor so that labor does not insist, even though that is part of negotiation. You go for the highest or the most impossible or the most impracticable. And then the other person on the other side of the negotiation will now begin to give you what you actually prayed for. But the man will think it is a token. That is why they said that the subsidy must be reversed, the petroleum product. I don't think it will be reversed because Nigerians are beginning to even adjust to, the current price. People are now, using less cars, on the road and all of that. People are pulling, to work. That is to say, join other people to take them to work. And on other days, they bring out their own cars, to make sure that, the petroleum products that they consume, is less because, it is very, very costly now. And a number of people are also adjusting to such an extent that some companies now want people to work almost like COVID era, where you probably work about 2 days or 3 days or thereabout, or you go out when it is absolutely necessary and all of that. And I think it is helping Nigeria, because we are actually trying to adjust. So, but for the labor, I want them to not be too hard on government. The argument is that the argument is that you must first of all engage with them before they can permit you, as it were, to raise the petroleum. To raise to raise the price.
George, let me jump in here again. Yes. Now you're talking about some, need to do things that the government should also do for Nigerians. Baba Yusuf, isn't this the time for us to start talking about grassroots governance, whereby the local governments can actually work more to ensure that people get education around their council? Because in other parts of the world, you really don't see a lot of people migrating from outside their homes to places far beyond to get educated. Speak to us more on some of the key things you expect every arm of government to do for the people now that this looks like something that we're all on the same page.
Thank you. I will answer the question from two perspectives, Suleiman. First of all, taking it from what my fellow panelist was talking about, the question you answered, what needs to do, we need to see some critical next steps, action plan rolled out by the government, apart from the engagements that are ongoing with the organized labor. I think it is also good for Mr. President through his team to speak to Nigerians on this very, very important issue. It's going to be a life-changing situation for us, and we are supporting Mr. President because there is a common denominator agreement that is a way to go. But Nigerians need to see clearly the pathway to exit this subsidy, and then what are the actions that will be taken to, as much as possible, make it easier than one will expect, given the critical issues. One of the major concerns, before I answer your questions, is while we are at it, I'm hearing a very loud silence about a very critical portion of the population of Nigeria, Suleiman. The organized labor have a safety net for the civil servants, for example, and the Bureau for Public Service Reform last year, told us that the total number of civil servants is less than 1 million. If we add that to the total number of people in the private sector, for example, and you compare to what IMF highlighted to us, the total number of people that operate in the informal sector in Nigeria, 80%, Suleiman, of the total population is what is in the informal sector. The Okada riders, the Keke riders, the hairdressers, people in the nano and micro, industry. Those are the people that drive the economy, impacting almost 50% to the GDP. We have also about 133 million Nigerians that have been declared multidimensionally poor. These people are not covered by the safety nets the labor, organized labor is, talking about. So while this conversation is going, I expect an expansion to also capture these very critical stakeholders in the scheme of things, so that whatever palliatives and whatever actions that will be taken by government to mitigate this will be, taken into consideration. The issue you talked about has to do with the overall governance framework. And I think this goes beyond Mr. President. This has to do with the layers of governance. I have been saying that one of the critical layers that has been failing Nigerians is actually not the presidency. Of course, the president of Nigeria is one of the most powerful presidents in the world. But we also need to start having some critical vision on the critical drivers of our economy, and that is the governors. And over time, with all due respect, they have been underperforming majorly. Minority of them have been performing, but I think we should be tasking them. And that is where the drill down will happen, Suleiman. From the presidency to the governors, they have even stifled the local government chairman. They have not aligned with the provisions of the Constitution, with regards to allowing these layers of government to operate at the subnational level. And that is why you see this level of opaqueness, if you like, in governance, and people are at a loss as to how things go. So we expect now leadership from the top. The president has made a constructive disruption move, very bold, front-facing. The next thing we would like Mr. President to do, in my opinion, is to open that vista of transparency. Let us have a dashboard, situation where in the next 2-3 months, people see what is going on with subsidy. We are supporting the subsidy, but we want to see the hows and whens clearly and the milestones achieved, so that people can know that that is the right way to go moving forward.
And in closing, if we can do this in 40 seconds, George Eke, notable Nigerian, talking about Dr. Tedo Peterside, has asked every critic of Jonathan in 2012 concerning the subsidy to seek his forgiveness and tender some form of apology to him. What do you say to that?
I didn't get that very clearly. Please, can you repeat the question?
I'm saying Tedo Peterside has said those who criticized Jonathan in 2012 when he attempted to take off subsidy should all apologize and ask for his forgiveness.
Yes, I get you now. Well, Solai, I see that as partisan sarcasm. It's not as if what he's saying is not correct, but he is saying it, to probably as sarcastic as he may well be, but that does not detract or does not remove, the fact that it is time to remove the subsidy, because there is no best time other than now. Yes, there may have been oppositions to a removal of subsidy in the past, but you see, from the governance system, we have found out that it is almost impossible, for us to be able to cope with this subsidy. And that is why it is now good to remove it. And that brings me to the difference between infrastructural development and governance. In a developing society like ours, if you notice, most of the governors are all talking about what infrastructure they are able to put in place and all of that. And they see that as their scorecard. I think we should begin to give more emphasis, put more emphasis on governance. Governance is provision of social services, health services, education, and all of that, because these people have to be alive, eat good food, and be healthy, and let there be good hospitals. Let us reduce the number of maternal mortality and, some of these figures that are disturbing. Instead of all these flyovers that fly to nowhere and all of that, everybody is trying to build a flyover and all. If we begin to give
I certainly agree that this conversation, is a conversation that we really can't exhaust on the show tonight. So I'd like to say thank you for being such nice company, George Eke from our Lagos studios, and of course, Baba Yusuf, many thanks for speaking with us on this subsidy in Broadway.